Jessica stood at the window of her large family home in Los Angeles, watching the last rays of sunlight fade behind the palm trees. The house, normally filled with the sounds of her younger sister Lois and her parents, was eerily silent. Tonight, for the first time, Jessica was completely alone. Her parents had left for Korea and Lois had come along for the long trip. Jessica, however, stayed behind. School wasn't on break, and she was determined to finish her semester with excellent grades. The quiet felt strange, even uncomfortable. She had always liked her solitude, but now in this enormous house it felt different. As she moved from room to room, her footsteps echoed in the empty hallways. The ticking of the old clock in the hallway was the only sound that broke the silence. It seemed louder than usual. The sun had long since set when Jessica decided to relax in the living room. She curled up on the couch with a book, trying to focus on her studies. But something wasn't right. Every now and then she could swear she heard a sound, soft, almost like whispers, faint but undeniably there. It was like someone was speaking, but the words were too quiet to understand. She tried to ignore it, brushing it off as her imagination. But then the whispers grew louder. A giggle, sharp and high-pitched, cut through the stillness. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. She looked around, her gaze scanning the room. No one was there. The sound came again, this time from upstairs. She hesitated. "It's nothing," she told herself. "Just the house settling." But she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching her. Reluctantly, she got up and walked to the base of the stairs, her footsteps slow and cautious. The house seemed unnaturally dark. Even though there were lights on, it felt different. She passed the living room, then the kitchen, making her way toward the staircase that led to the upper floors. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before her, dimly lit by a single overhead light. The whispering was clearer now, as if it was coming from the far end of the hallway, near the door to the attic. The attic, the place no one ever liked to go except for storage. With a deep breath, Jessica moved toward it. She had always been brave, the logical one in the family. Nothing scared her, at least that's what she told herself. Her hand reached out to the attic door handle. The air felt colder now, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She opened the door and the faint smell of dust and old wood filled her nose. The attic was small, but the darkness inside made it seem vast. And then she saw it. The soft glow of something hanging from the ceiling. A mobile. The wind from the open window made the mobile spin slowly, the sound of its soft chimes drifting into the silence. But there was something wrong. The mobile wasn't just spinning, it was spinning faster than it should have been. A cold shiver ran down Jessica's spine. Her eyes darted around the attic. The wooden floor creaked beneath her as she stepped closer. She noticed a small, dusty crib in the corner, the kind you'd expect to find in a baby's room, but it hadn't been used in years. "Who's there?" Jessica's voice cracked as she called out into the dark. No answer, but the whispers continued, faint and far away. They seemed to beckon her toward the crib. As her gaze locked on the old wooden structure, she noticed something strange. In the dim light, she saw the outline of something or someone standing by the crib. A small figure, almost invisible in the shadows, but there. Her breath caught in her throat. "Mommy, Mommy." The voice was soft, like the whisper of a child, but it was unmistakable. Jessica backed away, her heart racing. She spun around to leave, but before she could reach the door, the temperature in the attic dropped sharply. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. She could hear it clearly now. "Mommy, please." Terrified, Jessica ran down the stairs, slamming the attic door behind her. She was breathless, her mind racing. What was happening? What did it mean? That night, she tried to shake off the events. She convinced herself it was just her imagination, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the shadowy figure in the attic. The words echoed in her ears. "Mommy. Mommy ... By morning, Jessica's fears had not subsided. Something was in that house, something she couldn't explain, and it wasn't going to let her forget it. Later that day, Jessica found an old family album in her mother's room. She flipped through the pages until a photograph caught her attention. It was of her mother, Leanne, holding a small child. But the child didn't look like Jessica or Lois. It looked like the child from the attic, the one she had seen standing near the crib. Who was that child? And why had she appeared in the attic? As Jessica stared at the picture, a chilling thought crossed her mind. The child in the attic wasn't a stranger, it was someone from her own family, and they were not at rest. The house felt even emptier the next morning. Jessica woke up with a heaviness in her chest, the memories of last night still fresh in her mind. The whispering, the eerie figure by the crib, and the strange chill in the attic, they haunted her, tugging at the edge of her thoughts. She tried to focus on her studies, but it was impossible to concentrate. Every time she glanced up, the quiet of the house felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in, and the soft creaking of the floorboards under her feet only made the silence more unsettling. The house had always been big, but now it felt like a maze of shadows, hiding secrets in every corner. As Jessica walked through the kitchen, she noticed the family photo album on the table. It had been there the night before, and something about it pulled her in. She hadn't thought much of it before, but now she needed to know more. Her fingers hesitated over the cover before she opened it. Flipping through the pages, she found pictures of happier times, vacations, birthdays, family gatherings. And then, at the very back, there was one that made her stop cold. It was a picture of her mother, Leanne, standing in the garden, holding a small child in her arms. Jessica stared at the image, trying to place the face of the child. It wasn't Lois, and it wasn't her either. The child in the photo was a girl, around the same age Lois would be now. But the strangest thing was that Jessica couldn't remember ever seeing this child before. The face looked so familiar, yet so foreign. There was a sadness in the child's eyes that made Jessica's stomach tighten. She ran her fingers over the photo, trying to make sense of it. Her mother had never mentioned another child, at least not to Jessica. She couldn't recall a single conversation about a sibling she never knew. Confused and unsettled, Jessica decided to call her mother, hoping for some answers. It was already late afternoon in Korea, but her mother answered on the second ring. "Hi, sweetie, how's everything going?" Leanne's voice sounded cheerful, but there was a hint of unease in it, something Jessica couldn't quite put her finger on. "Mom, I was looking through the photo album and I saw a picture of you holding a little girl. Who is she?" Jessica's voice trembled slightly as she asked the question, her heart pounding in her chest. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Jessica could almost hear her mother's breath catch. "Jessica, it's nothing. Just forget about it," Leanne finally said, her voice distant, as if she was trying to push away the memory. "It's better if you don't know. Just focus on school, okay?" But Jessica wasn't satisfied with that answer. There was something in her mother's tone that told her this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. The picture was real, and that child was real too. Why was her mother acting so strangely? Why didn't she want to talk about it? As she sat in the living room staring at the photo album in her lap, Jessica's mind raced. The whispers from the attic, the shadowy figure by the crib. Was there a connection between the child in the photograph and the spirit she'd seen in the attic? That night, the house felt even more suffocating. The air was thick with a sense of unease, and the silence was so absolute it was almost unbearable. Jessica decided she had to confront whatever was haunting the house. She couldn't keep running from it. With her heart pounding in her chest, she made her way back to the attic. This time, she was determined to get to the bottom of it. The attic door creaked as she opened it, the darkness inside welcoming her like an old friend. The mobile was still there, spinning slowly, but the atmosphere felt different now, heavier. Jessica's breath caught in her throat as she glanced toward the corner where the crib stood, and there it was again. The same small figure she'd seen the night before, standing by the crib. Only this time, the figure wasn't just a shadow. It was clearer, more defined. It was a child, about the same age as the one in the photo, with pale skin and hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through her. "Mommy." The voice was faint but unmistakable. It came from the child, but it wasn't a plea. It was a command, almost as if it was expecting Jessica to understand something. Jessica's legs felt like they were made of stone as she stepped closer, her mind swirling with questions. The child's presence was overwhelming, like a weight pressing down on her chest. She could feel the sadness radiating from the figure, but it wasn't just sadness. There was something else there, something darker. "I know you," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're the child in the photo, aren't you?" The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, staring at Jessica with those deep, sorrowful eyes. Then, without warning, the child reached out a hand, slowly as if to beckon her forward. Jessica froze. Her heart was racing in her chest, and her mind screamed for her to run, but her feet wouldn't move. The child's hand hovered in the air, as if waiting for Jessica to take it. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the attic, and Jessica jumped back in shock. The child disappeared, fading into the shadows as if it had never been there at all. Panting, Jessica looked around the room, but the attic was empty once more. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine as the whispers returned, this time louder, more desperate. "Help me! Help me!" Jessica turned and ran out of the attic, slamming the door behind her. Her heart was still pounding in her chest as she stumbled down the stairs. She didn't know what she had just seen, but one thing was certain. Whatever haunted the house was connected to her mother's past, and it wasn't going to leave her alone until she found out the truth. Later that night, as Jessica lay in bed trying to make sense of everything, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother. "Forget what you saw. Don't dig into the past. There are things better left buried." Jessica's blood ran cold. Why was her mother so afraid of the truth, and what was she trying to hide? As she stared at the message, Jessica realized that the whispers, the child, the haunting, they were only the beginning. The house had secrets, and so did her mother. And if Jessica was going to find out what really happened, she would have to confront the past, no matter how terrifying it might be. The days after the incident in the attic felt like a blur for Jessica. Her mind was consumed with questions. The shadowy figure, the whispers, the chilling presence that seemed to follow her everywhere. It was all too much. And the photo of the mysterious child in her mother's album only deepened the sense of dread that hung over her like a dark cloud. Sleep had become an impossible task. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that child's hollow eyes staring back at her, the words, "Mommy, Mommy," echoing in her ears. The grief in the child's voice was so real, so raw, that Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that this spirit wasn't angry, it was lost. One evening, as Jessica sat at her desk trying to study, she found herself staring at the photograph again. The child's face was like a puzzle, a piece of the past that didn't quite fit. But why had her mother never mentioned this child? Why was she hiding something so significant? The more Jessica thought about it, the more certain she became that the child in the attic and the child in the photo were connected. And if she was ever going to find peace in the house again, she needed answers. Determined, she decided to confront her mother. It was time to get to the bottom of this, no matter the cost. She dialed her mother's number, her fingers trembling as the phone rang. "Hi, sweetie, how are you?" Leanne's voice sounded too cheerful, too forced. "I need to know about the child in the photo," Jessica said, cutting straight to the point. "Who was she? Why don't you ever talk about her?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. Then her mother's voice came back low and shaky. "Jessica, I've already told you it's nothing. That was a long time ago. It's in the past. You don't need to know about it." But Jessica wasn't backing down. "Mom, I saw the child in the attic. She's still here. She's trying to reach out to me. I have to understand what happened." Leanne's voice faltered. "No, Jessica, you don't understand. You're better off not knowing the truth. Some things are too painful to remember." Before Jessica could respond, her mother abruptly ended the call. Jessica stared at her phone, her heart sinking. There was something her mother wasn't telling her. But what? And why was her mother so afraid to talk about it? That night, the house felt colder than ever. The usual hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, and the occasional creak of the house settling only made the silence feel heavier. Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The whispers were back, and this time they weren't faint. They were clearer, more insistent. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She needed to go back to the attic. The ghost, the child, whatever it was calling her, and she couldn't run from it anymore. With a deep breath, Jessica made her way to the attic door once more. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she knew she had to face whatever lay hidden in that darkness. When she opened the attic door, the temperature dropped sharply, and the air felt thick with tension. The mobile was still there, spinning in the same eerie motion, casting long shadows across the room. But this time, it wasn't just the mobile that caught her attention. In the far corner of the room, near the crib, the figure appeared again. The child. But this time, Jessica didn't feel the same terror she had before. The figure was still faint, blurry, but there was something different about it. The sadness was more palpable, more raw. The child's eyes were fixed on her, and this time the voice was louder, clearer. "Mommy, please." The words weren't just whispers. They were desperate, full of a longing that made Jessica's heart ache. She took a hesitant step forward, her body trembling with both fear and a deep, overwhelming sense of sorrow. The child reached out its small hand, the fingers trembling as if they were waiting for Jessica to take it. "I'm here," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here to help you." The child's face seemed to soften, the sadness in its eyes deepening. The spirit wasn't angry, it was grieving, lost in a way that was almost unbearable to witness. Jessica felt her heart break for the child. It was as if she could feel the grief, her grief, radiating from the figure, a sorrow so deep it seemed to fill the entire attic. Suddenly, a flood of memories came rushing back to Jessica. In a flash, she saw an image of her mother, Leanne, standing in the attic, holding a small child in her arms. The child was limp, lifeless. Her mother's face was pale, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Jessica gasped, her hands shaking as the vision faded. She understood now. The child in the attic wasn't a stranger, it wasn't an accident, it was her sibling, the one her mother had lost, the child who had died before Jessica was born. But there was more. The truth was darker than she had imagined. This child's death wasn't a natural one. In that moment, Jessica realized that the child had never been allowed to rest. Her mother had hidden the truth, buried the pain, and now the spirit was trapped in the house, unable to find peace. "Mom," Jessica whispered, her heart heavy with sorrow. "I understand now. You never let her go." The child's hand lowered, and the figure began to fade, the sorrowful eyes never leaving Jessica's face. But just as it disappeared, Jessica heard a voice, her mother's voice, calling from downstairs. "Jessica, don't do this. Don't go any further." The child was gone. But Jessica knew now that the spirit's grief wasn't the only secret buried in the house. The truth about her mother's past, about the child who had died, was far from over. And Jessica couldn't stop now. She had to find out everything. The house wasn't done with her yet. As Jessica descended the attic stairs, she saw her mother standing in the hallway. Leanne's face was pale, her eyes filled with an emotion Jessica had never seen before, fear. "You shouldn't have found out," her mother said, her voice trembling. Jessica froze. "What do you mean? What happened? Why didn't you tell me?" But before her mother could answer, the house suddenly went silent. The air was thick and the temperature dropped to an unbearable chill. And then, from somewhere deep in the house, came the sound of a child crying. The sound of a child crying echoed through the house, sharp and gut-wrenching. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. She turned to her mother, who stood frozen in the hallway, her face as pale as a ghost. Her eyes were wide with fear, her lips trembling, and for the first time, Jessica saw her mother not as the strong, calm figure she had always been, but as someone desperately trying to hold on to a truth that was slipping away. "Mom," Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening? What's going on? Who is that child? What are you hiding?" Leanne took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she reached out to her daughter. "Jessica, you don't understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want you to know this. I thought if I kept it buried, if I kept it forgotten, you'd be safe." Jessica's mind raced. Safe from what? "Who was she?" Jessica pressed, her voice growing more insistent. "Why didn't you tell me about her?" Leanne swallowed hard, tears welling up in her eyes. She looked as if she was going to crumble under the weight of the secret. "Her name was Emily," she whispered. "She was my daughter, your sister." Jessica's world seemed to tilt, as if the ground beneath her feet had suddenly vanished. "What?" Her voice broke. "But I don't remember her. You never told me about her." "I couldn't," Leanne's voice faltered. "Emily died when she was just 3 years old. I didn't know how to cope with it. I couldn't let you grow up with the shadow of her death hanging over us, so I buried it all. I didn't want you to live with that pain." Jessica felt a chill run through her. "But she's still here," she said softly. "She's in the house. She's been trying to reach me." Leanne closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I never wanted you to know this, but she never left. Her spirit, it couldn't move on after she died. I tried everything I could to keep it hidden, to keep it from you." Jessica's mind was spinning. "How did she die, Mom? What happened?" Her mother hesitated, the words stuck in her throat. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't an accident, Jessica. Emily, she didn't die in her sleep. She drowned in the pool." Leanne's voice broke as she spoke the words, as though saying them aloud was opening up a wound that could never heal. Jessica's stomach twisted. "How could you never tell me about this?" she asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and pain. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "I couldn't bear it," Leanne said, her voice shaking. "I couldn't face the truth of what happened. I couldn't deal with the guilt. I thought if I didn't talk about it, if I didn't acknowledge it, I could just pretend it never happened." "But Emily," Jessica began, but she was interrupted by a sudden sharp noise from upstairs. The child's cry. It was louder now, desperate. Jessica looked toward the staircase, a knot of fear tightening in her chest. The sound seemed to be coming from the attic, and for a moment she thought she saw the faintest shadow darting across the landing at the top of the stairs. She didn't wait another second. Without a word, she turned and ran up the stairs, her feet pounding on the wooden floors as she raced toward the source of the sound. "Jessica, wait!" her mother cried, but Jessica was already out of sight, her mind focused only on the cries. She reached the attic door, her breath coming in short gasps, and hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The air inside was colder than ever. The mobile continued to spin, its soft chimes echoing in the darkness, but there was no sign of the child. And then she saw it. The figure of a small girl standing by the crib, her back to Jessica. The child's hair was dark and tangled, and her small, fragile body trembled as if caught in an eternal sorrow. Her thin shoulders were hunched and her head hung low. But Jessica knew it was Emily. There was no mistaking the shape of the figure, the outline of the small child, so familiar yet so lost. "Emily?" Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. The child didn't move, but the cries grew louder, more mournful, filling the entire room. Jessica stepped forward, her heart aching. "I know what happened to you," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know what happened to you, Emily. You didn't deserve to die like that." The child's head jerked up and Jessica felt her heart stop. Emily's eyes were wide and empty, hollow as if they had never known peace. The child's gaze was locked onto hers, and in that moment, Jessica understood the pain that had kept Emily's spirit trapped in the house for so long. It wasn't just grief, it was a broken soul, unable to let go of the past. Mommy," Emily whispered in a voice so soft, so fragile it seemed to drift on the air like a breeze. Jessica's throat tightened and she stepped closer, her hand reaching out toward the child. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what happened." The child didn't move. Instead, a wave of cold washed over Jessica, and the air in the attic grew thick with an unbearable weight. She could feel Emily's pain like it was her own. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift. The temperature dropped, and Jessica felt a presence behind her. She turned around, and there, in the doorway, stood her mother. Leanne's face was a mask of fear and regret. "I'm sorry, Jessica," she said, her voice broken. "I'm sorry I never told you. I never wanted you to know, but now she won't leave. She never will until you help her, until she finds peace." Jessica turned back to Emily, who was still staring at her, her eyes filled with a sorrow that would never end. "How do I help her, Mom?" Jessica asked, her voice desperate. Her mother stepped forward, taking Jessica's hand. "There's a ritual, a way to release her spirit, but it's dangerous, Jessica. It will force her to face what happened. It will make her remember." "I have to do it," Jessica said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "She's trapped here, Mom. I can't leave her like this. I have to help her find peace." Leanne looked at her daughter with tears in her eyes. "I'll help you. We'll do it together. But you have to promise me, no matter what happens, you won't turn away." Jessica nodded, her mind made up. The truth was out now, and it was time to bring Emily's spirit the peace she had been denied. The ritual began in the attic, as the temperature dropped even further and the air grew thick with tension. Candles flickered, their flames dancing wildly as Jessica and her mother recited the words. But as the final words left their lips, the ground shook. A loud, anguished cry filled the house, and for the first time, Jessica felt something cold, cold as death, brush against her skin. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut, and the light went out.